Start with birth rates. It's collapsing. What's going on in Vietnam with birth rates?
The problem is that our birth rate is declining at such an accelerated rate. It's extremely troublesome.
And people keep saying like Vietnam is going to be the counter to China or China plus
We're
one.
not going
It's
to
not
if we
going
don't
to.
have skilled workers, right?
And realistically, the population is so much smaller.
Vietnam loses at least 3% of its total GDP per year because we are not employing 2.1 million population of people with disabilities.
Germany, Japan, Korea, they're facing working age population. So they're bringing highly qualified people from Vietnam to their countries now.
So
it's
not just
a lot
highly
of
qualified,
things.
it's low
Yeah,
skilled,
both.
mid-skilled, and high-skilled labor
Everyone,
because
yeah.
everyone across the board.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Vietnam Innovators. I'm your host, Hao. Thank you for tuning in every single week and supporting the podcast. Without you, this would not be possible. Today's guest is kind of like my older sister. She's always like watching me and commenting and working with us as well. Mimi Vu, she's the partner at Raise Partners, which is a consultancy based here in Ho Chi Minh City, but is very much a global one as well, focused on all things ESG. But in particular, Mimi is also an expert about human trafficking, migration, and that's what we have her on the show here today to talk about. Mimi, welcome to the studio.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. We're actually just 2-3 weeks out of the latest ESG investor conference that we co-hosted with Raise. You can read all about the recaps on Vietcetera.com and on our YouTube pages. But today is reserved about a very sensitive but important topic that not enough people are talking about, which is everything about population. As some of you might know, in the news these days, they're talking about population and birth rates collapsing around the world. They're saying in places like South Korea where it's under 1, and keep in mind the replacement rate is 2.1. So the populations in countries like Korea might be cut in half in the next coming decades. But in particular, we're focused about how Vietnam plays its role in the whole global migration, population, and its own birth rate kind of situation. So Mimi, I'm going to stop there because you know more numbers than I do. Can you just first share to our audience like what you do, who you are, and then we'll get into the meat of the podcast today.
Let's see who I am and what do I do. My name is Mimi Vu, born and raised in Michigan. And I came here to Vietnam almost 18 years ago to work in development. So most of my career has been in the NGO sector, working across the country on all sorts of development issues, from climate change mitigation and adaptation to water and sanitation, healthcare infrastructure, access to education, support for ethnic minority communities, gender equality. And then what I'm probably most known for is human trafficking prevention and migration. And then I started Raise Partners about 4 years ago with Van Lee, who's my co-founder, as a consulting practice to help clients who wanted to improve their social and environmental impact and also ESG impact, to help them do that better, create the strategies, do the research, develop the plans, and connect as well. And so that's what I've been doing in Vietnam for almost 18 years now.
Okay. If people were to ask me who are the people that they should meet if they were to come to Vietnam for the first time, and Mimi is definitely on that list, especially if you're interested in anything social impact, investing, thinking about the future of the country, really fascinating stuff. And today, like I mentioned earlier, birth rates and population are the topic of today's podcast. And it's all about like future-proofing this country. I think I want to reframe the discussion a bit because a lot of the public and private sector, they think only about the bottom line and sometimes in the short term, because a lot of these investments and reframing of thinkings are going to affect bottom lines, but are also about future-proofing businesses, making them resilient and ultimately even more profitable. So let's start with birth rates. It's collapsing from what I know. I'll leave it over to you though. Explain what's going on in Vietnam with birth rates.
Yeah, it's not out of the ordinary what Vietnam is experiencing because it's following a trend worldwide, but especially in I'd say East Asian countries. And I'm putting Vietnam in that category for the moment because we do share strong Confucian influence, similar to countries like South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, China, Japan, etc. And so for Vietnam, we are still considered a mid-developing country, right? We still are trying to grow, and the problem is that our birth rate is declining at such an accelerated rate, and it's extremely troublesome. Because if you look at other countries like Japan or Korea that have severely declining birth rates as well, they're OECD countries. It took them decades to get to that point, whereas for Vietnam, we're not at that point yet, where we are, on the same level as like an OECD country. So we don't have the foundations, the wealth to handle the repercussions of a declining birth rate. So last year, Vietnam's birth rate dropped, the average birth rate dropped to 1.95. So you had said before that the replacement rate is 2.1, right? We're at 1.95, and it's even worse in the cities. So according to the Ho Chi Minh City's Department of Family and Population, it's in the health department, it's in 2022, Ho Chi Minh City's birth rate was 1.39, and then it dropped down to 1.32 last year. So we're losing people, right? And there's a number of reasons why the birth rate is declining, and in order to reverse that, we need to address all of them. And this is where we have to look at gender equality. That's a big one. The role of women, the role of girls, the gender imbalance in this country, which is the third highest in the world, behind China and India. We have to look at labor migration. We have to look at upskilling workers in Vietnam, because we're right now in what is called the golden population era, which is basically for every one dependent, so someone who doesn't work is dependent on others, you have two people supporting that person, right? So that's where we are at right now. That is projected to end either in 2036 or 2038, which means we're aging rapidly. And because we don't have the birth replacement rate to keep adding population and workers every year to take care of elderly population, then you have what you find in Korea and Taiwan, which is, it's kind of like a tree, right? So you have like the older population, all the branches up at top, but the trunk is the younger population, and that trunk keeps getting skinnier and skinnier, and then that will collapse, right? And that leads to societal collapse, population collapse, economic collapse.
It's like the end of the world almost.
Yeah.
I think society, and this is as humans as well, we are all about survivalism and protecting oneself, and I think at an individual level sometimes we're a bit short-sighted. We're not thinking about the 20-30 years down the line, and I think policymakers in the places like Japan and Korea, for instance, they're very reactive now, unfortunately. And I talk with my colleagues from those places, and they're like, we're giving tax incentives and bonuses for having more kids, or all these
subsidies.
It's not bad necessarily, but it's very reactive, meaning is this actually a solution? And so my question for you, Mimi, is what are those solutions that you would propose? If you give me just a 1, 2, 3 kind of bullet point.
But as you said, those subsidies, tax incentives, the financial incentives to encourage families to have more kids is not going to work. This has been done all over the world. It's been done in Europe. Italy tried it. South Korea is floating a plan to give each family $75,000 to have a kid. It doesn't.
$75,000.
Yeah, that's being floated around right now. So it's not actual policy yet, but it doesn't work because it's not just about finances, right? There's cultural conditions, there's societal conditions that make it difficult for couples, actually to couple up, because also the marriage rates are declining, right? But also to give birth. And the first thing is gender inequality. So what is common to countries like Vietnam, Japan, South Korea, China, all these, again, the East Asian countries that have, we're influenced by a lot of different things, right, in our culture, but one of the dominant influences is Neo-Confucianism. That idea of the binary yin-yang and this belief that sons are worth more than daughters. It's very deeply embedded in all of our societies. And because of that has led to severe gender birth disparity rates in all these countries. So as I mentioned before, Vietnam is number 3 in the world behind India and China. So the average rate, the normal rate is 100 female babies to every 105 male babies. So I don't know if people actually understand why more male babies die than female babies, but for whatever reason, that's your normal rate. In Vietnam, it's 100 to female babies to about 100 and just over 112 male babies.
Okay.
And so according to the Vietnam General Statistics Office, about 40,000 female fetuses in Vietnam are aborted each year because they are female, right? And so that is causing a massive gender imbalance, not just a birth disparity rate, but a massive gender imbalance. By 2034, the GSO and UN Women project that Vietnam will have a shortage of at least 1.5 million women of marriageable and working age. So that's 15 to 49. That's in less than 10 years, okay?
Paint me a scenario of what you think will happen at that point. A lot of men won't have wives.
Yeah,
right?
I don't need to paint the scenario because we know what's happening. We know what's going to happen because it's happening in South Korea, it's happening in Taiwan, it's happening in Japan, it's happening in China, which means that so several things will happen at once. First is a market will open up for brides. That's just we need women,
and that'll create corruption among
human trafficking. My biggest fear, and this is I do a lot of projections, right, based on existing patterns, is that if we don't figure this out now, Vietnam has the potential to become not just a source country, because we are one of the top source countries for trafficking victims, but we will also simultaneously become a destination for trafficking victims to fill the demand for women of marriageable age. And again, this is not wild conjecture. It is something that exists already with the patterns that we see of Vietnamese women and girls being sold into China to fill their women's shortage because of the one-child policy from 1979 to I think 2016. So you have that, number one.
And it's not just human trafficking, it's just it's legal migration too. So we talked off record just earlier, it's been published many times. The idea of these OECD countries like Germany, Japan, Korea, they're facing population issues, working age population. So they're bringing highly qualified people from Vietnam to their countries now.
So not just highly qualified, it's low-skilled, mid-skilled, and high-skilled labor. Everyone, because everyone across the board. So one of the centerpieces of the Vietnamese economy or economic plan is labor export. And it makes sense because we right now have a population that is young, that is hungry, and works really hard, right? And the salaries that Vietnamese earn overseas are much higher than what they would earn currently in country. So for example, if you were to go to Germany to work legally as a dishwasher in a Vietnamese-owned restaurant in Berlin, your starting salary per month is anywhere between 2,500 euros to 3,000 euros. Okay, and that's like a back-of-house kitchen staff person. Right?
And for those that may not be aware, what is it in Vietnam for a similar role? 6 million probably.
Probably, maybe even less. Okay. Depending, because there's a big pay gap between rural and urban areas too. But we are a remittance country. We're usually between number 8 and 10 in the world, and so the amount of money that we receive every year is significant. It contributes a big chunk to our GDP. So last year, I think it's usually somewhere around 20 billion gets sent back, and that's just through legal channels, right? And usually it makes up anywhere between 4 to 7% of our total GDP, given depending on what year it is. So, and this is money that's reinvested in the country into small businesses, sending family members to school. So it is we are still dependent on that overseas remittance money to come back, right? I'm not at all, people are like, oh, well, more Vietnamese people should just stay home and work. And I'm like, no, I don't agree, because I think, you and I are American, but we live here in Vietnam. We have the advantage of having a passport that allows us to travel, experience life, go to another country, and just find ourselves, right? And I feel I believe that every Vietnamese person should also have the opportunity. When we talk about labor export, we tend to talk about Vietnamese people in terms of utility, and not really focus on them as individual people with their own hopes and dreams and desires to experience a life outside of what they grew up with. And labor, going abroad to work is oftentimes a really great way to go abroad for 3 years, 5 years, have your experience or whatever, and then gain some skills, earn some money, and then come back home, right? And so the problem is that when Vietnamese people do it, there's a lot of opportunity for them to be exploited because of the process of migration, because they are often taken advantage of by like unscrupulous labor brokers that overcharge them, pull them into debt bondage, which then can often put them under the control of transnational organized crime groups. And so the process of migration, of labor migration, needs to be protected.
What would you say is the breakup between like legal migration that's like healthy, perhaps even regulated, or even like a sustainable business, quote unquote, versus the ones that are like brokered illegally? Like of the 500,000 live in Japan, for instance, how many, if you had to just take a guess between the split?
That's really hard because it's there's a whole range of
labor pools.
There's a whole spectrum of ways you can be exploited, right? So the first one is being overcharged for broker fees. I think it's usually, your fees are limited. The government limits it to something like a 1 month salary, which is reasonable, right? But definitely the unscrupulous labor brokers will overcharge by like 10 times as much. For definitely going to Europe will be 10, 20 times as much, and fake interest rates on top of that as well. But then there's other ways of exploiting. So, putting them into debt bondage. If they don't have the money to pay for their exorbitant broker fees, then they tend to borrow from black market money lenders. Which then puts them under control of, sometimes criminal gangs, very unethical people who then control the migrants' funds, their salaries, and also can oftentimes threaten their families at home as well. So they're put under the control of that. Other ways of exploitation is, overcharging, but then telling the Vietnamese worker that they will earn a much higher salary overseas than they actually will. And so by the time they get to whatever the destination country is, they realize that the salary that they're actually earning is nowhere near enough to pay back the broker fees and send money home to support their families and live in the country that they're working in. And so then they will often abscond to look for work that's higher paying, which is then, they go underground. Once their contract is up and they still haven't met the repayment terms or whatever, then they end up overstaying visas. And so Vietnamese are the number one country or group of people of overseas workers that overstay their visas in Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan. It's a big, big problem, to the point where a couple of years ago, South Korea actually suspended visa applications from certain provinces like Nghệ and Hà Tĩnh, which were the provinces that had the biggest number of people overstaying their visas and absconding in Korea. And so and I think they've reinstated them already, but it all starts with that recruitment process that makes it risky and exploitative for the Vietnamese.
So it seems like the problems are all inside Vietnam.
Yeah,
mostly.
and the thing is that the government realizes this. They've passed several laws and directives, overseas labor, to protect the Vietnamese, right? To make sure that they don't overpay on their broker fees, to make sure that the brokers are ethical in providing the correct information and all that. But the question is, how do you implement all of this, right? So the framework.
Let's talk about
there.
that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. So Mimi, you've painted a very, you could say dark picture, but it's the reality. It's very much what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think people are underestimating that. I've read reports where you mentioned just now that the governments of overseas countries have been suspending visa applications from certain provinces. I've read reports where up to 5,000 Vietnamese are disappearing in Japan every year. Like, that's an astounding number of people. Like, that's an entire city, essentially, or little town.
It's more in Europe too.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think people are talking about this enough. So my question for you is this whole idea of implementation.
Yeah.
So of course, there's the public sector. It's doing what it can. It has limited funding, though, I imagine. That's on both the international side and the domestic side. Let's talk about the private sector, because you also run a consultancy that specializes in this. I'm sure some companies and governments have approached you to not only share about these ideas, but also talk about varying levels of implementation. So give us a mock-up implementation plan very quickly.
Okay, so
as much as we can here
so
today.
So let's tackle existing labor shortage in Vietnam, right? So right now, our population is about 100 million people. So we have about 52 million people. So 52% of the country is of working age, right? That's like 15 to 64, right? But only less than 30% of that, like so 14 million are skilled. So we have over 70% of the population which is unskilled labor. And so this is where, and Vietnam has a lot, very ambitious when it comes to moving up the value chain of manufacturing, shifting away from like the low value, low skilled manufacturing, and just trying to boost the economy so it's a more high value economy. And so what we need to do then is make sure that these workers who are unskilled get skilled, so that they become skilled, that they get paid more money. If they get paid more money, a higher salary, then they'll be less likely to go abroad or they can go abroad. They can go abroad as skilled, but they're going abroad as skilled and not taking the risky route to go abroad, right? And then being then at the mercy of unscrupulous labor brokers. So if I were an investor, I would look at, okay, for example, semiconductor industry. There's different layers to the semiconductor industry. I know for the U.S., for example, they are focusing on Vietnam as it's called ATP, so assembly, testing, and packaging, which is like the last step for semiconductors, right? Because they want to shift the design and the higher skilled stuff back to the U.S. from China. But for Vietnam, yes, it's great that we can, that's one kind of stream, but we also need to invest in our own upskilling so that we can eventually start doing sooner rather than later the design, the test, the higher level, higher value part of the manufacturing process of semiconductor manufacturing, rather than only relying on assembly and testing.
I want to pause there because that paints a very interesting picture of the whole supply chain from the design phase, which is where all the IP and you can argue like the highest paid jobs are, all the way to the assembly, which is huge scale, but is very low value add in the whole supply chain. So Vietnam right now is at the bottom end of the high value chain, semiconductors. We're talking everything from agriculture to garments to furniture, all the way now to semiconductors. How far along in that journey are we? And are there any private sector companies, especially big ones, actually making that happen in Vietnam today?
We're at the beginning of that journey because there's a lot of investment that has to go into developing the infrastructure, like building the factories.
And we're talking billions of dollars.
Yeah, billions of dollars. So while that is happening, so it has to happen in multiple stages, right? What you want is to invest in technical schools. So it's like junior college, 2-year vocational training schools. That's like that's the level that you need to be at from an education and training standpoint to be able to work at that ATP level of semiconductor manufacturing. Also, it's the correct or the appropriate level to be able to go abroad as a skilled worker. So if you invest in creating these technical schools, whatever you want to call it, vocational training schools, whatever, right, that actually teach and train Vietnamese laborers, Vietnamese workers, and they could be brand new or they could be existing workers in the manufacturing sector, and it's just a matter of retraining them or upskilling them. I mean, these training programs can last anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, depending on what it is. So it's not long, right? And with that added training, they can then earn a higher salary and start filling the labor force that's needed to making sure that that lower level, at least of the technical manufacturing in Vietnam, starts taking place, and also be able to go abroad at a higher skilled level to earn more money and then be safer in terms of migration. So, for example, Hungary, which is a major labor migration destination for Vietnamese, there right now, about 10,000 Vietnamese are going per year to Hungary. And the numbers will increase because there's high demand for Vietnamese. We're the number one preferred country of origin for migrant workers in not just Hungary, but also countries like Slovakia, Poland, Germany, and that has to do with a lot of historical reasons. But Hungary has a lot of investment now from Chinese and South Korean companies in battery manufacturing, right? So it's becoming like the manufacturing hub for high-tech batteries and other things in Europe. And many of these companies have received basically exemption from the Hungarian government to allow them to recruit workers from what we call third countries. So instead of recruiting workers from Hungary because they don't, there's a labor shortage, there are not enough, they're recruiting from Vietnam and the Philippines. Right, but we have to have a certain skill level in order. And Vietnam, again, is the #1 desired country. There's a lot of, also cultural reasons why, like, Asian company, Asian factory wants to work with Asian workers, like, all that, right? The problem is that the workers who are going to Hungary are still at the lower skilled, and they're because the labor migration process is still not fully, safety nets are not there. And so Hungary instead is being used as a pass-through or transit country into Germany and the UK. So you have Vietnamese workers who are going to Hungary. All these Hungarian factories and companies are hiring these Vietnamese workers and intending, assuming that they will work for them, and then you have Vietnamese workers absconding because it's part of the bigger route they've been told that they have to go through in order to get to Germany.
Okay.
Or the UK.
So I'm,
right?
I'm imagining I'm a possible worker that's been vetted.
Yeah.
I'm here from Vietnam. Somebody's approaching me to recruit me.
Yeah.
And it's both misleading, but also kind of intentional. So basically, like, a recruiter's coming to me and being like, "Hey, in order to get to the UK, you've got to do 6 months in Hungary at some factory doing whatever it might be." Is that actually what's being told to them? And how is this information being passed around? Is it on the dark channels, like groups on these messaging apps?
No, it's on Facebook. It's on Zalo. It's word of mouth. I mean, it's very.
Are there centers for recruitment in these places? Like, people can physically go? Or is it all online?
Yeah, you can. Like, for example, in Vinh, because Nghệ An is the province that sends more workers overseas than any other province. They have them, but so much of it is in the villages. It's a word of mouth, because this is how we work, right? If you have a family or someone who has done something and it's beneficial to that family, the parents will start bragging and they'll say, "Oh, my kid is amazing. They did this. Hey, why don't you get your kid to do what my kid did? And you can also be like this." And that's how it happened.
Would it be possible to say that big private companies, like the likes of the ones making semiconductors or smartphones in Vietnam, for instance, do they employ similar recruitment practices? Like,
they tend to go through large recruiters, like factory recruiters, and they exist. And they're, state-owned and private, and most of them are fine. Most of them are good.
Yep.
But it's the ones in the rural areas and the provinces, that are unregulated, and they're the ones who are, and that's not just regulation by the Vietnamese government, but regulation by the destination countries as well.
Is anyone doing anything about that?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Well, the Vietnamese government does have a list of vetted agencies.
Okay.
But there's a lot of loopholes, and so needs to be a lot more resources allocated to, like the labor inspectors, for example, to be able to continue and increase their labor inspections. But anyways, that was a bit of a tangent. But back to your original question about the investment. So as an investor, if you're looking at, okay, we need to upskill our labor force, because if we don't have enough workers to fuel our rise in the manufacturing, in the global supply chain, in the value chain. And that is where we're at right now.
And people keep saying, like, Vietnam is going to be the counter to China, or China plus
We're
one,
not
right?
going to
It's not
if we
going
don't
to.
have skilled workers, right?
And realistically, the population is so much smaller. So
Yeah,
you can't
much
compare.
smaller. I mean, we're big, but we're not. Compared to China, we're tiny.
And of course, there's the whole idea of automation happening,
Exactly.
AI. So a lot of processes will be cut out.
Will be cut out, but it's also an opportunity. And this is where, when we talk about investment, it's not just, oh, you have to invest in this or else something will happen. It's also a big opportunity to make a lot of money, because you have over 70% of the working population is unskilled. So that's a massive opportunity right there. If we have, let's say 2036 is the end of our golden population era, right? That's the projection. That's less than 12 years. So you have less than 12 years to crank out skilled workers, and there is demand for them. It's not like, you train all these workers and they can't find jobs. They will be able to find jobs. They'll either find jobs in Vietnam, or they'll get higher skilled, higher paid, safer jobs overseas. And so it is it's going to be a money-making machine if people are willing to invest in it. And specifically investing in these education, technical training schools and centers in areas away from Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi. away from the urban areas, because the demand and the need is found in those areas that are currently underserved and with underserved people. For example, people with disabilities, right? Vietnam has about 7 million people with disabilities who are of working age. And about 2.1 million of that people with disabilities can work but are unemployed because of a variety of things. Social stigma is definitely one of them. And lack of accessibility, lack of like physical actual accessibility for them to be able to get educated, trained, and employed. And because of that, the International Labor Organization estimates that Vietnam loses at least 3% of its total GDP per year because we are not employing 2.1 million population of people with disabilities. And so at our conference, we, our ESG conference that we just had, we had a panel on workforce development. And unfortunately, we ran out of time, so we didn't get to go deeply into the investment side of it. But one of the panelists was Anh Huấn Lê, who is an investor in an AI tech company in Da Nang called Rainscales, which employs all people with various disabilities, visual and physical. And it's a young company. It's maybe like 3 or 4 years old, but they now have 120 employees. And so it's AI, right? So you think AI, oh, that's automated, like nobody does that. There's still a human element to it, right? You have to have people in the background doing all the coding and all the typing and whatever else you have to do in order to train the AI. And that's where the employment comes into play. And so now they're building a new office that's accessible, and hopefully, I'm hoping that they continue, he and his group continue to invest in companies like Rainscales that shows that, yes, it's filling a serious need, right? So it's training people who are able to work but have been, for a variety of reasons, otherwise unemployed, training them up, employing them, providing a very high-tech service to clients in countries like Japan and South Korea. And on top of that, giving people who have been on the margins of society a dignified life, stable career, stable salary, something to feel proud, and the ability to live a quote-unquote normal life, right? And that's what we want. We need more of this to happen in order for Vietnam to be stronger economically and also as a society. Because if we don't have the two together, then we can't reach the goals, the development goals that we want, that we have targeted, right?
Very good explanation, Mary. Yeah. Thank you. It's hopefully inspired some of our audience here today to think about this situation going on in a different way. We're nearing the end of our podcast and time here, Mimi, and we could probably talk for hours, but we'll have to save that for another time. My last question for you is, this is more for my question, that out of my interest actually, or you talked about how Vietnamese deserve to also explore the world and understand the world, and perhaps bring it back to Vietnam too. Yeah. It is at the same time a bit of a double-edged sword. We're losing this brain drain. We've talked about that for years. The idea that the best and the brightest are going abroad, but at the same time, a lot of them are coming back now. But could you talk about what I mean by double-edged sword exactly? Like, is there a happy balance here? Is it preferred that Vietnamese come back home at one point? Maybe you can elaborate your thoughts on this trend. I mean,
it is a double-edged sword in the sense that, yes, we are sending our best and brightest abroad to be educated. And I think in the past, they would have stayed. But now, and you've seen it, right? In the last, at least for me, the last 10 years, this move, this shift of Vietnamese who've gone overseas coming back to Vietnam. And
a lot even just never going overseas in the first place.
Yeah, and so that is happening more and more because, and what's interesting, and I talk to a lot of Vietnamese migrant workers. In the last 10 years, probably close to 200 in Vietnam, in transit countries, in destination markets, in wherever it is, on airplanes, I talk to them all. And what's been interesting is when I ask them, so I'll give you an example. Last year I was in Berlin and I was, at a tram stop waiting, and I'm not exaggerating, almost every Asian person you see in Berlin is going to be Vietnamese. It just is. We dominate the city, and it's really funny because you catch each other's eye, and you can hear them speak Vietnamese, and you look like you understand what they're saying, they'll just come up and approach you and start talking. So that happened to me a lot when I was in Berlin, and so most of these young people I was talking to were migrant workers from mainly Quảng Bình and Nghệ An and Hà Tĩnh province. And they had come over to work in Vietnamese restaurants. It's a huge demand for that. The program is it's a 3-year apprenticeship program, and then after they complete it, they get certification, and they are allowed to stay longer in Germany and work, and then get citizenship and all of that, right? So it's a very generous program. And I asked them, I was like, "Oh, are you moving to Germany permanently?" And they looked at me and they're like, "No." And I was like, "Really? Yeah, how long are you going to stay for?" And they're like, 5 years maybe. And I was like, "Why?" And they're like, "It's too cold. First of all, it's too cold."
Okay. Yeah.
They're like, "Food's too expensive." But and then there's something to be said about the pull of quê hương, right? And I think what's interesting is when I talk to a lot of the Vietnamese in Nghệ An or Hà Tĩnh and those areas who are just like, I need to, everything, the grass is greener on the other side, right? So, and then a lot of times they ignore, or they bypass Vietnam's growth and the opportunities here for them, because this is so deeply embedded in their culture, going abroad to work, and that's the only path to prosperity. It's so deeply embedded that that's what they're focused on. But once you go overseas, and then your perspective shifts, because then you start looking at Vietnam through different eyes, and you look at it through the eyes of a lot of countries that are like, "Oh, Vietnam is such an opportunity, we're investing in Vietnam," or Việt kiều in those countries, who are like, "Oh, I'm gonna definitely move to Vietnam. I want to go to Vietnam because here there's XYZ, but in Vietnam you can do this, 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 and there's lots of opportunity." Especially young Việt kiều, like the Gen Zs and whatever comes after Gen Z over in those countries, right? They want to come back to Vietnam. And again, we've seen this huge rise in Việt kiều from all over the world coming to Vietnam, establishing startups, just living their lives here. And so that perspective then changes for the local Vietnamese who go work abroad. And then they start thinking, okay, I'm gonna get skilled, I'm gonna travel, I'm gonna earn a lot of money, more money than I would have been able to do in Vietnam at this point in my life, but then they always think about returning home, for sure. The ones who don't think that far are the ones who are caught in a system of debt bondage and trafficking and then legal systems, so that's different. But for the ones who migrate and are working legally and all that, most of them are they plan on returning to Vietnam.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. I mean, hopefully through our media, we can even do a survey of our readers and the global VQ audience to understand how many are thinking about coming home. Is that actually happening? But what we can tell you right now is that on the ground, I would have to agree with Mimi, there definitely is a trend of people coming back home. So hopefully you'll be joining us. Thank you, Mimi, so much for sharing your insights today. We're a bit time constrained, unfortunately, but I did want to do this podcast because it's something top of mind for me. I'm on X.com all the time, on Instagram, and I'm always seeing these memes about the population changing, and we want to get some specific insights about what's going on in Vietnam. So thank you so much, Mimi, and best of luck to Raise. And if you're interested in hearing more about what Mimi has to share, especially about population, migration, human trafficking, we'll include her LinkedIn in below. Feel free to reach out to her. I'm sure she'd be happy to share more there. Thank you so much, everyone, and see you next time on another episode of Vietnam Innovators. Take care. Bye-bye.